Perfect. So let's get started then. First of all, I am shocked that the room is almost fully packed. So this is now the largest crowd I've spoken to. So thanks for turning up, everyone. And just to make sure that everyone's in the right talk. So if you're here to hear about indie games marketing, you're in the correct place. I am going to tackle the very difficult task of running down what it takes to build up a marketing plan as an indie marketer or indie games developer. So first, I'd like to see how many people in the room are indie developers. Good. Right audience. How many have never done any sort of marketing before? Good. I have the right audience. The rest of you are welcome to stay, but the chances are I will not be able to teach you many new things, but we'll see. So first, I'm going to quickly run through who I am as a person. I'll keep it short because no one cares, but just so you know who you're listening to for the next 30 minutes. So, my name's Annie Valkama. I use they, them pronouns. I am currently a brand manager at Playtonic Games, but I have previously worked at Super Rare Games, also at the brand capacity. And prior to that, I worked outside of games in the world of academic publishings at Oxford University Press. I am also a columnist for the Debug Indie Games magazine, which if you're not familiar with, I would highly recommend checking it out. And I am also a founder of Social Link and Game Devs North. And if anyone's interested in either of those, feel free to talk to me after the talk. Now, without further ado, why should I care about marketing? Because surely good games will sell themselves. As much as I would like that to be the case, unfortunately, that is not the case. And as you can see on the chart here, we have the annual game releases on Steam for the past 10 years. 2014, we were talking about 1,700 titles. 2023, we were talking over 1,400 titles. And this wouldn't necessarily be an issue if Steam worked a little differently. But anyone who has worked with Steam knows that the algorithm is a tricky one. Now, I'm going to briefly talk you through about some of the ways of visibility that Steam offers. So the first one is the algorithmic one, and this consists of all of the following. So we have your popular and upcoming that we all want to be in when we are approaching our launch. And this is, as the name suggests, the top wishlisted games that are approaching release. There is a lot of numbers that go around in terms of how many wishlists do I need in order to appear in the popular upcoming. I've seen everything from 5,000 to 10,000, but 10,000 is the figure that you most often hear. Even Valve themselves have said that there is not a magic number, but 10,000 tends to be the one that gets used most often. Then we have your new and trending, and again, self-explanatory, so top new releases at the moment. But the thing I do want to draw attention to here specifically is that we are talking a very, very small minority of games that get this featuring on the Steam algorithm. We are talking about roughly 5 to 10% of new releases each week. So if we think back to the previous slide with last year's releases, we are only talking just over 1,400 games being promoted through new and trending throughout the year out of the over 14,000 games that were released. Then there's your top sellers. But if your game's in the top sellers and you're here, I don't know why you're here, but you're welcome to stay. Maybe tell me what you did to get there. Then there's your curated featuring, which is the so-called manual stuff where you have to chat with Valve. And this includes things like your featured and recommended, although there is this element of algorithm plays a part in that too. But this is literally just top of the front page when you first go on Steam. Generally, these are the biggest AAA titles you can think of, but occasionally you see the odd indie game pop up there. I think the one I saw there most recently was Crow Country, but we are talking, if I remember correctly, we're talking like 6 figures in terms of unit sales in order to get into that featured and recommended. Then you have your daily deals, which anyone can apply for, but again, Steam or Valve is unlikely to give you one unless you're already kind of generated enough player interest on their platform. And then you have your various kind of curated sales, both run by Valve themselves and any sort of external third parties. Now, so hopefully that is a bit of a demonstration of why a good game just does not sell itself these days. I don't think that's ever been the case, but especially these days, it's harder harder than ever to make yourself stand out. So that's why I'm here, hopefully able to help some of you give your games a better chance. Now, before you can start planning any sort of marketing activities around your title, you have to do a little bit of market research at first. And I could give an entire talk about market research alone, but I'm not going to do that today. So I'm only going to be focusing on a few aspects that I think are the kind of most crucial to kind of get anyone started. And the first one of those two is your competitor analysis. So the great thing about Steam is that every single game that's on that platform has that lovely, more like this button at the very end of the page. So I've used Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair as an example, as that's a title that our studio has worked on. But in addition to this, I would highly recommend making use of your tags to look for similar titles. And essentially the reason you want to be doing competitor analysis is because you want to see, first of all, how have your competitors done? You want to see the things they have done, and then you want to help identify any potential gaps or pitfalls, and essentially finding how does your game fit into all of this. Now, I have included here some kind of basic questions you can be asking yourself when you start thinking about competitor analysis. So first of all, you want to look into how has my competitors made any of their major announcements. Are we talking about participation in any sort of digital showcase? Have they partnered up with a media outlet? Have they got a first-party support if they're also going out on consoles? So these sort of things. Then you want to be looking at how have my competitors reviewed, not obviously only on Steam, but also in the media. And when you're looking at Steam specifically, you can look for any sort of community sentiment. So are there any common things, either positive or negative, that have been highlighted about your competitors' games? Obviously, if any highlighted wins or issues are something that also is similar to your game, obviously even more worth making a note of that. And then also you want to look into if content creators have picked up your competitors' titles, and if not, why not? If yes, why yes? There's a fantastic website called Salinome specifically for content creators. Obviously, you have your multitude of content creator management platforms. You have your Rainmakers, your Keymailers, your Lurkits. But Salinome is literally a website where you can look for any game you can think of, your own or your competitor, or something completely random, and it will show you every single Twitch content creator who has covered that game and when they have covered that game. So it's a very useful website that I can highly recommend to anyone. Then I have a few tips when it comes to competitor analysis. So there's specific websites that pull some data from kind of Steam's backend. So Steam Spy might be the one that most people are familiar with. But even if you don't want to put money towards platforms like that, there is actually a way of roughly estimating how well a game has sold. And there's a formula that has been generated by a gentleman called Simon Carles. Games analytics is kind of his bread and butter. He's been doing it for, I believe, 15 or 20 years now. So what he has found out is that there's basically a range, I believe, is from like 41 to 59 when it comes to like how many reviews do you need per sale. So what you can do is you can literally go on Steam, look at the total number of reviews and multiply it roughly by 50. And you can get a rough estimate of how well a game has sold based on that. Also, a second thing worth of noting is something you want to look into is obviously how have your competitors priced themselves. And what I like to tie this into is looking into how long are the games that my competitors are making. But what I do want to highlight here is that obviously length does not always equal quality. But it is a thing worth making a mental note of. For example, if in a very extreme example, you're making a game that's half the length of your competitors and you're looking to charge twice as much, because you will most likely get asked about that. So it's always worth at least coming prepared with an answer if that is something you're looking to do. And finally, there's a few sort of websites, your Google Trends, your Steam DBs, and Salinome, which I already talked about, which you can sometimes help identify any sort of major peaks in your competitors' marketing campaigns. And something very basic I like doing is if I see a peak and I cannot immediately tell what it is, sometimes I just literally take the game title, pop it onto a search engine of my choice, and roughly find a date range. And generally that's a way I'm able to find what has happened on a date that has caused this kind of a peak for a title. Cool. So the second aspect that I then want to briefly touch upon is finding your audience, because you cannot market your game correctly if you don't know who you're marketing it to. And I do not recommend starting marketing and finding out that way. You're wasting valuable time. When you start your marketing, you want to know who you're marketing to. So generally speaking, people split their audiences into primary and secondary, with primary audience obviously being your main target, and then secondary after that. Some people have multiple audiences, but primary and secondary generally is enough. So then when you start profiling your audience, first this kind of ties back into competitor analysis. You want to find those kind of affinity titles that appeal to your audience. You also want to think about some of the expectations your audience might have. So for example, for Yooka-Laylee and the Impossible Lair, it's obviously heavily inspired by your classic Nintendo platformers, your Donkey Kong Countries, and so forth, as we are the former Rare guys. Then you want to think a little bit about where they are based and what sort of age group you're working with. For example, for things like cozy games, which is the buzzword these days, cozy games, you're looking at a wider demographic. But then something like very heavy, like strategy games or RTSs, they tend to have a slightly older audience. And the reason you need to know this is because this can then heavily impact on things like what social media platforms should I be using and things like that. And then obviously any other interest you can find out about your audience. So for example, retro gamers are more likely to be into things like old school graphics, or like they might still be collecting physical media. They might be really into arcades, things like that. Now, I want to talk a bit about the importance of nailing your audience. Not like that. And here I have 3 pieces of content, all with this rather sexual tone in one way or another. And I see my friend Owen in the front row. He is the guy who has gotten a trailer on the official PlayStation channel that says the garlic looks like balls. Now, the reason I have chosen 3 pieces of content with a similar theme is because out of these 3 pieces of content, one did not go down particularly well. And if you weren't around the Twitter sphere when this happened, it is this tweet from the folks over at Farm Folks Game. And I can elaborate on this, why it is a demonstration of how they do not know what their audience is. So the things with games like Cult of the Lamb, Vampire Survivors, first of all, established IPs, established brands. And these have been, from the very beginning, built on that kind of being a bit unhinged. You never know what's coming, being a bit edgy. They've been built like that from the very beginning. Now, with this Farm Folks Game, personally, well, I'm not a farming sim kind of person to begin with, but I hadn't personally heard of this game before until this tweet came out. But from a professional's perspective, working in marketing, when you generally think about your cozy farming game audiences, first of all, you're talking quite female-heavy audience. You're also talking about generally quite a diverse community. They also tend to be quite inclusive. So in case someone didn't read that tweet, so the tweet out about which version of these female main characters' breast physics do you like the best? So you can probably imagine why that did not go down too well. I can see what kind of audience they were trying to reach, but it's definitely not the one that would be playing cozy farming sims. Now, before we go into actual marketing activities, this is the thing I get asked by far the most. Annie, should I spend my money, or can I release a game without any marketing budget? The answer to the latter is yes, you can. And the way I have tried to do this presentation is try and give examples of either free or rather affordable opportunities. Because I know for an indie developer, unless you're working with a publisher or are very unfortunate, fortunate rather, not unfortunate, you don't generally have thousands upon thousands to spend on marketing. But if you are in the lucky position where you have a bit of money to spend, unfortunately, I cannot give you a list of things or ways to split your budget, because there is no one way of doing it. And what I mean by this is, and I have 3 examples here, although full disclosure, I have not worked on any of these titles. These are simply based on my own observations, how the marketing was done for these titles. So first of all is Dredge. When Dredge released, it was covered by practically every single, well, not every single content creator, but content creators from small, medium to large. So in this instance, I think it's quite easy to see that I think Team 17 put quite a lot of money behind their content creator outreach. Whilst then you look at something like Cult of the Lamb. If you've been to any bigger events, Gamescom, your EGX, your WSD earlier this year, or any of the overseas ones, you tend to see Devolver a lot of these events. And if you've seen that lamb costume, I can make a rough guess how much that has cost. That costume alone, and we're talking 5 figures just for that costume. So I think it's quite safe to say that in the case of Cult of the Lamb, they've go quite heavily on events, and then also like their community. There was a thing they were doing, I think it was this side of the year or late last year, where they were offering one lucky couple the chance to have a Cult of the Lamb style wedding somewhere in Australia. I was very tempted to participate, but I don't think I could afford the travel to Australia. And finally, it's a bit of an outlier, because I don't actually think that this game had much of a marketing budget behind it. I could be completely wrong, but first of all, Little Kitty Big City, it's a solo developer. But I'm sure most people have seen this game about, because it got a massive marketing push from Nintendo. And believe it or not, that is actually free. It's just incredibly difficult to get. And similar to Cult of the Lamb, they just built an extremely strong community around the game. That's kind of 3 examples of how you can split your marketing budget. Basically, the short answer is it depends. It depends on the game, what works best for the game. Cool. Now, before I move forward, just a quick, the one thing I want to say about building your marketing timeline is essentially don't just announce or reveal your title, flatline, then announce your release date, then flatline, and then launch your title. Now, the next thing, and this is what I personally believe is by far your most important marketing asset, and most importantly, it's a completely free asset, and that is your Steam page. Now, the first thing I do want to say is that for the love of God, do not just put out your Steam page and think to yourself, I'll sort it out eventually. I just need to start getting wish lists. Be creative with it. The only thing to keep in mind is you are not technically allowed to include competing titles. If you're making a Zelda-like, you're not allowed to put Legend of Zelda in your search keywords. And also, finally, one thing to keep in mind is your key art and logo. I had a whole slide for key art and logo and trailers, but I had to take it out because of time constraints. But please always make sure that when you have your key art and logo in that small capsule on Steam, first of all, is it legible? Does it look good? And does it stand out? If not, it's time to revisit your key art and your logo. Now, we're already running short on time, but I'm finally talking about actual marketing activities. Woo! So first, we're going to go through PR, and this covers post journalists and content creators, starting with the journalists. If there are any in the room, hello. The first thing I do want to say is that journalists are not out to get you. This is more common in the AAA space, but on the Twitter sphere, you sometimes see comments saying, do not befriend games journalists because they will just try to get you to leak stuff to them. This is not true. They're completely normal human beings, and I'm friends with quite a few games journalists. They're fun to be around. So please don't let people care you. They're not out to get you. Now, in terms of finding them, obviously, social media is both fantastic and horrible. But if you're not a social media type of person, then most outlets do actually have some sort of an authors or teams page on their website. Sometimes it can be a bit harder to find, but it is generally there. And there you can find some social media links or email addresses, at least for editors, sometimes even for writers. And worst case scenario, you can contact some general inbox. Briefly, and again, if I have more time, I talk a bit more about press releases in detail, but there are some free mailing platforms that you can use. I link to a few of them at the very end of the presentation, so you can snap a picture once we get there. And also, obviously, the thing that is important to keep in mind that please reach out to media when you have something coming up soon. You might think you're giving them a heads up by contacting them months in advance, saying like, oh, I might have something coming up in November. Unless you're making something that is really hyped, there's not much media can really do with that information. They cannot be like, okay, around that time I will plot 3 weeks of my time to review your game. But so essentially timing is everything when getting in touch with media. Cool. Content creators then. I mentioned Salinome, so I'm not going to go into detail about it again, but absolutely fantastic and completely free tool to use, so please make use of it. And content creators are a tricky one to get a hold of sometimes. There's many of my PR friends very regularly begging on Twitter for content creators to include their emails somewhere easy to find. And still more often than not, you are struggling to find it. But Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube are generally where I check for content creator emails. And unless it's a big shock content creator, if I go through those and I don't find an email address, I give up and move on. Also, and this is something you see a few influencer agencies do, is that a good old Twitter call out is sometimes very effective. You just post saying, oh, I have review keys coming out for X title. Any content creators wanting to pick up the game, those tend to go around like wildfire. And finally, I just want to give some credit to smaller content creators. And to be fair, this applies to smaller media outlets as well. Do not underestimate them, especially with smaller content creators. Sometimes you might find that their audiences are way more engaged than some of those big content creators out there. Cool. We are moving on to events, and I have used the subtitle of more accessible than you think. And I'm just going to be covering both physical and digital events, but starting with the physical events. So what most people might not be aware is that quite a few kind of bigger events do actually offer some free opportunities for developers to show off their games. So WSD or WASD, whichever you prefer, is one of those. They usually do the Curio showcase, which anyone can apply for. And then you can basically get space in the expo for completely free. Similarly with EGX, although they are combining it with MCM this year, so I don't know what it's going to look like. But traditionally, they've done the left field collection, which specifically tends to focus on more creative or out of the left, as the name suggests, out of the left field type of games. But again, completely free to submit to. You get free access to EGX if you get selected. The third one, and it's something I actually only learned this year, but even Tokyo Game Show offers free space at their event for small indie developers. And the cool thing about this is there's a limit to how much money you are making in order to apply for this. So if you're earning too much, you're not allowed to apply for this. So they really want to be supporting indies. Obviously, it's Tokyo, so if you're going to Tokyo from here, there's cost associated, but I just wanted to flag it anyway because I found it really cool. And then last but not least, we have Gamescom with Indie Arena booth, which, as you see, it's not marked as free because unfortunately it's not. Unless they've been partnering with Nintendo for the past couple of years, and the Nintendo area of Indie Arena booth is free if you get accepted. But if not, the cheapest space at Gamescom at Indie Arena booth starts at about 2,500 euros, which is still a lot of money. But if you see how much regular booth space costs at Gamescom, it is a lot less. Perfect. Quickly through digital events. So I'm sure that in the post-COVID period, people have seen the digital showcases have kind of risen up, and it's fantastic to see that a lot of them, surprising amount of them, are actually free or come at a very low cost. Obviously, there is your Game Awards and there is your Future Game Shows, all fantastic opportunities, but they do tend to be a bit spenny. But in terms of free digital events, you have your Wholesome Direct, there's Future of Play, there's Day of the Devs. If you went to Craig Rice and Shuhei's keynote early in the week, you would have met them. And then there's 6-1 Indie, and there's even Guerrilla Collective. Granted, it costs 500 USD if you get accepted, but again, it's very little compared to some of the more spenny options out there. Now, the one event I wanted to give a bit more attention to is Steam Next Fest. And the key thing to always keep in mind about Steam Next Fest is that you only get the one shot. You can only sign up to this once. So with that being said, the timing of this is everything. If you're 6 to 12 plus months away from your launch, for the love of God, please do not sign up to Steam Next Fest. You can do as many demos as you want. You can pump out a demo every single month if you want, but do not do a Steam Next Fest. Instead, the general recommendation, and the one that I live and die by, is doing the Steam Next Fest that is closest to your launch, with the few caveats. For example, if you're launching in February, maybe you don't do the February Next Fest, but the October one in the previous year. But generally, go for whatever is closest to your game launch. And now the big thing why Steam Next Fest is so important, and this is data from Valve themselves. I'll bet even this is a few years old, so it might even be a bigger number than that. But the median increase in wish lists over Steam Next Fest is 14 times greater than that of the games outside of this event. But again, do not just dump your demo on Steam and call it a day. Just like there is over 14,000 games released every year, there is hundreds of demos at every single Steam Next Fest. So things to keep in mind, and I'm very aware of my timing, making sure your Steam page is up to date. Stream if possible. Valve is very much encouraging this, so either pre-recorded content, looping your trailer, anything, it just increases your visibility. And obviously engaging with content creators, press, and your community on social media. I am gonna try and quickly wrap this up. So we have two more things to quickly cover. Social media, the horrifying, the time-consuming, the one that most indie developers I speak to do not want to be doing. But the good news is I don't recommend signing up to every single social media platform. If you're a one-man team or even a two-man team and you sign up to every single social media, also you can do absolutely none of them particularly well. So instead, I would say pick one or two, again, based on where your game's audience is most likely to be. Frequency matters when it comes to social media posts, but it's also important to keep in mind. Yep, I have actually run out of time. That is a bit embarrassing. But yeah, so to wrap up that social media frequency, but quality matters as well. And then last, I would have had a little bit on community. And the main thing about community is it's not the same as social media. So community management is about people engagement. And that means things like having a Discord, engaging with your Steam communities, your Reddit, your streaming, having Q&As, betas, all that sort of stuff. Now, because I do have to wrap up, if anyone wants to take a picture of useful websites and tools that I would recommend checking out based on what your needs are, do that now. I'll give you a little bit of time. Cool. Okay. There was a second slide that I wanted to quickly show, and then we're done here. Yeah. Cool. So here's some articles and videos, also depending on what are your needs. So for example, how does Steam work against small games? Guide to wish lists, how to get your game covered by journalists. And then there's a few great videos. For example, the one talking about marketing on zero budgets. Cool. I do apologize that we are running out of time. Yeah. But anyway, thanks for coming. Any questions, please feel free to talk to me afterwards.